If this looks like tedious work, believe me, it is. Very tedious. But when you do it right, it's so worth it. Welcome back to the JPM Performance channel. Today we are working on a rear shelf for this F Production Miata. As you can see, I've got some of it done already. We still have the other side that we need to fabricate and install, but I wanted to go over my process for doing this properly. It's not an easy thing to do, but you need some thin aluminum. My preference is between 30 and 40 thousandths thick. And I'm big on making templates for these. So I just use this construction paper and obviously some scissors and start trimming. I'll show you a couple of the other things that I use. For instance, here's a template that I used for this other side. So I made some notations on angles for bends, and this fit in here just perfectly. It's a little bit tricky because these Miatas have a recessed lip here where the convertible top originally sat, and so something like this works really good. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're burning up aluminum. So if you take the time to make a template like this, you'll be in much better shape. The other thing that I use, as you can see, that are installed are Clecos. So they just come with these are 1/8" ones, because that's what I'm going to be using for rivets. So it's a temporary way to fasten your panels, and before we actually rivet it all together, because what I'll do when I'm all done here is disassemble everything, sand all the edges, clean it up. I have made a couple of notations on just a couple of teeny tiny places I want to trim when I disassemble this. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go over and show you some of the tools that I use. Not just your typical hand tools, but I have a shear here. I've got a Beverly shear for very precise finite pieces. This is a shrinker stretcher from Mittler Brothers, and this is one of the main things that I use here. This is a really neat machine that will do a lot of different things. I currently have the spoiler lip on it, but as you can see, I have a bunch of different dies for a number of different things. I use this flange one quite a bit, where you can actually put an edge on the edge of a piece of aluminum. That one works really good, but there's all sorts of dies that you can get for these, which makes a big difference. You can also roll beads into a panel of aluminum like this, and we will do that as well when we're finished. And what this does is this makes this flat piece of aluminum much more rigid when it has beads rolled into it. So that's the other thing that we'll do. So let's get started and make our last couple of pieces. It's always a little bit tricky to get stuff like this done properly, but if you take your time and you don't rush through it, you can make it happen pretty easily. So the beauty of this situation is I've got my template from the other side, which, if I flip it over, should fit pretty nicely on this side. Now you can see the other thing that I have to deal with here is this gap that I have. So I'm going to end up making this in a couple of different pieces rather than one. Also have to fit around the roll bar. So kind of tricky. Let's get started. So like anything else, trim a little bit at a time. It's a lot harder to put it back. But the beauty of having paper is, if you did cut too much, you could just tape a piece on top, keep cutting. So, as you can see, I'm trimming just a little bit at a time. Had to cut a little bit here to get around this bar. Now I'm working on cutting around here. I want this to be level like the other side. So just take some time. If this looks like tedious work, believe me, it is. Very tedious. But when you do it right, it's so worth it. This piece is very, very close. So it looks pretty good. Show you the couple of notes that I made here. So as you can see, you need to add 1/8 of an inch right here, but we're fitting nicely here. Need to add 3/16 of an inch here. I've marked where I want to do my 90-degree pieces in the corners, as well as this side. Obviously going to be a pretty tricky piece. The trickiest piece in this whole shelf for sure, but I'll give her a shot here. I think the trickiest thing is going to be able to figure out exactly what I want to do under this bar. That's going to be a tough one. Okay, so the only bummer about this is that in the front here, I don't have quite enough room for my piece to slip in because of this panel. So now I need to remove this panel and take just 1/16 of an inch off of it. But that's the way it goes sometimes. This is super custom stuff. And it's very, very time consuming. It's one of the reasons why I didn't do this video through this entire process. This has been, by the time I'm done here, 10 hours probably to make this whole shelf piece. Just to make it look really good like this, that's just what it takes. Fortunately, these come out real easy. Actually, while I'm at it here, since I'm removing this panel anyway, why don't we go ahead and mark for some beads. So we want to make sure it's very, very straight. So I generally like to do a long one, a short one, and then another long one just to try and break it up a little bit. I think it looks better. Really only need to put them in this main panel here. So we'll split the difference. So we're right at 22. Do our first one in the middle at 11. And we just kind of split the difference. Sometimes I just take artistic whatever and just mark what I think is going to look the best also. Okay, I think that looks good. So once I get it out, I can measure, and we'll go ahead and do those while this is out. So time not wasted. Also, something else I want to show you here too. So if you do these right, this piece has a flange on it. We pull this up, there's a step underneath here. That way when these are fastened, it's perfectly flat. Just makes it look really, really nice. And one of the things that I like to do. So okay, so we've got our 3 marks where we're going to do our beads, plus we need to trim just a 1/16 of an inch off from here to here. So let's wander over that direction, make that happen. These first ones are right at 5 inches. Okay. 5/11, 16 and a half. So now we need to determine how long we want to make them. Like I was saying, I'd like to make a short one in the middle, 2 long ones. So because this isn't exactly centered in the car, I'm not super worried about centering these exactly perfect, but I still try and make them pretty close. So 32.5 inches long, cut that in half, 16 1/4 for the center. Okay. Looks to me like I'm big into symmetry. It's just an OCD thing of mine, which I think is cool. So I'm going to put 10 inches right on the center mark there. And we'll mark this one, 20 inches long. And we'll do this one half that. Inches, and then another 20. Okay, that's where our beads will go. First thing I'm going to do here, I think, is trim this edge slightly. So I've got a bunch of different tools I can do that with. Probably going to just go ahead and use this if I can fit it, which I can. not seem like much, but it's going to make this perfect. Okay, let's move over to another machine. This is how we're going to make some beads. One of the things about using a machine like this is you kind of need to have steady hands. Fortunately, I do. And you're going to see why, because there's not really a guide. They do make guides that you can set up, but because I've got a variable panel that isn't necessarily symmetrical, I like to just eyeball it. I think most true fabricators do. So you've got this set of dies, which will make it very easy. Now, I like my ridges to stick up at the top, so let's make sure that we install these properly. I don't know why anybody would actually want them to stick down. That would kind of look weird. Catch dirt and debris and okay, I'm going to get a little closer here. Might be kind of hard to see this if we don't zoom in a tick. Make sure that it's turning the right direction, which it is. So once you get it centered, bring this down till it just touches. You'll feel it. And then I like to go 2 turns. And that's about the right depth for me. And then you just eyeball it and through you go. Nice and easy. This is where the steady hands thing comes into play. And there's our first bead. Beautiful. So you can see it a little better on the back side even. You can see that depth. And it's already much more rigid than it was before. We'll finish these up and we can reinstall this panel. Like I said, now it wasn't a waste to pull this off. See there the depth on those. That's going to look really good. Okay, let's reinstall this baby. So I'm marking the back side because if I put it down like this, I could potentially bend my little lip here. So I'm going to mark where I want to trim. And then flip it over. Do it on this side. May not look like much, but it's enough to make it just about perfect. Sand that edge, we'll be looking good. Okay, now we can go reinstall. You can see how time consuming this is, simply because of the detail work, but we're getting closer now. Well, that's about it for today's episode. Finally get a chance to work on my car at the end of the day here. Make sure you click on that bell for post notifications, and like, share, and subscribe. We're going to keep moving forward with this project, so stay tuned.